Welcome, everybody. My name is Dave Tompkins. I am the Associate Director of Undergraduate Studies, and I'm hosting this panel today on the future of computer science education. I thought I'd give you just a very brief synopsis of why I invited each of these guests to be here today to help you guide your questions. First, Carmen is our Associate Professor teaching stream now with our new fancy titles. He developed one of our largest and most popular online courses, and he's kind of, for a lot of us teaching stream faculty, he is kind of our go-to guy because he stays abreast of sort of the pedagogy and the conferences and reads papers and things like that, where I don't have the time often to do that, so I often rely on Carmen to do that. David needs very little introduction, but my understanding is the impetus for this discussion was that his children are approaching or near university age, and so at this kind of milestone, it's always good to reflect upon how the state of university education and as it relates to computer science. May is an associate professor here, and he does research on how, one of his research topics is on how people use tools like ChatGPT and Copilot when they are writing code. And so I thought he had some interesting insights into what the future is going to look like for what our graduates are going to do. And Gord is a professor emeritus, and many of my colleagues cite Gord as the inspiration for them to want to become better instructors. And he sort of pioneered the approach of sort of reverse engineering a course, where we work on what do we want our assignments to look like, and then let's build our courses for how to get that point. And I think a lot of people in this room have learned from Gord in many different ways. So just to get us started, I thought I'd ask a question for all the panelists to reflect upon how things are different now from when they learned computer science, however many years ago that was. I'll just share one quick analogy. When I was an undergrad, we had an instructor who notoriously couldn't get the projector to work. And so I think the more things change, the more things stay the same. But for each of you, I will ask just a little bit of insight into what do you think is maybe the biggest or more striking difference between how students learned then versus how students learn now. So I'll start with our youngest, Carmen.
Sure. Thank you. So thank you for the introduction. How things have changed since I was a student until now. I think for me, one of the biggest things has been accessibility. And I mean this in a couple of facets, but the one I'm going to focus on is that information now is just so much more ubiquitous than when I was a student. Growing up, YouTube was a place where we used to watch Charlie Biting Fingers and the Numa Numa guy and all these sorts of things, which were fun and entertaining, but YouTube really wasn't an education platform like it is today, where now it's so much easier to just go online and say, I want to learn how to program Python, and within seconds you can find an 8-hour crash course, which I don't recommend watching 8 hours of YouTube consecutively, but you can find one out there where you can actually teach yourself a lot of the skills that you need to become a competent Python programmer. Growing up, it was just so much harder to find things. It was so much harder to know where to look. Good resources were few and far between. And they most certainly weren't free for the most part. So I think that accessibility portion has been one of the biggest changes that I see in the younger generation. It just is so much easier to get access to good information than it was when I was a student in the mid-2000s. So maybe I'll leave it there so that other people can chime in, but yeah.
We'll just sweep along. Go ahead, David.
Well, I think when I was here as a graduate student, we're taught all the proper things, but one of my office mates was focused on how to compromise the Honeywell time-sharing system. And he wasn't taught how to do this, but he figured it out anyway. And so I remember one day that we came in, instead of it saying male waiting, it said whales mating as courtesy of his intrusion. And so what's changed? Well, he didn't make any money off that, and so we continue to teach the proper stuff in universities, and yet the most profitable thing in computing these days is, I think somebody brought down the whole healthcare network in the United States and made several I think, something like $60 million out of it in ransomware before they got it back online again. And again, we're not teaching how to do this. So I think computer science education has in some ways not changed much. It's the things that people are learning outside of class that have gotten more dangerous, I think. So I'm not sure I see that much difference in how we're doing computer education.
So I'll say something similar to what Carmen was saying, accessibility, but in a different way, is that accessibility to devices, to computing devices. Look at the number of laptops that are there here, and it's not even a lecture, right? Almost everyone in my lecture comes in with a laptop. So there are things that I can teach and say, try this out now. Okay, let's change this other thing and try this out now. In the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was doing my computing education, there were shared computing labs where you had to wait for your turn to get access to a desktop. There certainly wasn't computers in every classroom. So there's limited amount of experimenting that you could do with what they could learn in class. You could say, if you change this, this is what will happen, and they'll have to take your word for it, not try it out on their own to see what happened. Or change something on their own when there's a couple of minutes break to see what else they can do. So I think that is a big difference between what was available then and now, and for the better, I think, because now they can learn a lot more. And maybe like what David was saying, it's during these tweaking that they figure out, oh, this breaks here, so let me try this out a little bit more and learn more about breaking things.
When I started computer science, computing and data were a scarce resource, and we have them in abundance now. I had no intention of going into computer science. There was plenty of opportunity for curiosity-driven investigation. You didn't have to be, injected from birth with, projects and whatever people seem to think that they need now to do computer science. I think that even in the course of my undergraduate, there was more and more pressure of people coming into computer science because they wanted a job. And we've had various waves of that. But now we have very much these conflicting constituencies, if you like, the knowledge creation, curiosity-driven stream, and the I want a great job and I want to hack big projects stream. I have one other comment, which is kind of more general on education, which is I think that in secondary and post-secondary, there's been this big push since I started school to cram more and more and more and more stuff into curricula and into people's heads, and to measure whether they learned it or not by how well they can kind of vaguely reproduce it, rather than act on it, rather than start from fundamental principles and learn problem solving and have objective outcomes to see whether they've actually solved the problem that they were given.
Thank you. Let's open it up to questions first. And if you all stall, then I will have some. Go ahead, Shai.
Hi. So yeah, I look at the panel, and to me, this is. I'm doing theory of computer science. There's nobody here doing theory. I'm doing AI. There's nobody here who does. I mean, it's like to me like you picked identify computer science with some programming, with something hands-on, but the big chunks which are completely different.
So you're criticizing my selection of the panel, is what you're saying. I actually asked ChatGPT who should be on the panel, and that's what it came out with, so blame ChatGPT.
I just want to add the caveat that whatever we hear, I mean, I think Gord was very close to it when saying that the part of students that come for knowledge and not for learning a job. And that's something that if you want to learn how to solve problems, then you don't do it by, I don't see how watching YouTube videos helps you learn how to solve problems. I think what God was referring to was very close to it.
So during the pandemic, you made videos. And your students learned from those videos.
And I mean, I want to make sure that professors do not come obsolete.
Oh, I agree. I'm just hoping my career survives for the next 15 years until I can retire. Any panelists want to respond to Shai's comments?
Sure, I will. I mean, it reminds me of one point that I forgot to make. When I started school, there were 25% women in my honors class. And now it's half that, maybe less than half that. What's happening? Why aren't we attracting people who are, obvious that we can see we're not attracting them, but there are other less visible groups of people that do not find our current offerings attractive.
I think since you mentioned ChatGPT, I think, coming back to the future of computer science education, to me it's an interesting challenge because you can't ignore that technology in terms of developing software. And I've talked to a number of companies and people, and they're seeing tremendous benefits from that. But it's interesting that, there's a new age of software development, which is AI-aided software development, where you have this system sitting beside you. You can ask to write all sorts of code, and it increases your productivity enormously until it comes up with what the AI people call hallucination, which the rest of the world should be calling a very nicely conceived total lie. And one of the things that I think is an interesting challenge in computing, we've been doing this for years, is you write a program, you think it's supposed to work, but you've sabotaged your intent in some subtle way, and you have to debug it. But and of course, we see this problem all over the world, that there's just huge piles of software that sort of kind of works. But we've never had people developing software where they have such an intelligent thing assisting them that occasionally is going to sabotage human civilization. And it kind of reminds me of one of the things that attracted me into computing was I was involved in math before, got an undergraduate degree in math, and I got fed up with math because it seemed like it moved into a world where all the proofs were proof by contradiction. That you'd say you'd be able to prove that something existed by proving a contradiction if it didn't, but you had no idea what it was. And I thought I escaped that by going into computing, but you could view that what's happened in computing is that we write these theorems and we claim that we make it work, but you have the hackers and so on, the ransomware people, that come up with a proof by contradiction. You thought that you debugged this thing, they prove you haven't. You thought you made it secure, they proved you haven't. By contradiction, by showing an example where they brought down the whole airport or whatever by these sort of techniques. So I think there's this amazing emerging challenge where we've solved a lot of problems in computing, but we haven't solved this one, which is, how do you avoid ending up with incredibly subtle problems in the software?
So let me just steer the conversation one way. I think for many people in the room, we all kind of had an aha moment at one point when we used ChatGPT, where we were like, oh, this is changing things. Do you think we need to change our curriculum? Let's just ask that open question, and then if you do or do not, then share your opinion on that. So I'll give you the floor, May.
So I'll answer this with respect to also Shai's last comment of our professor is going to be obsolete, right? So and I'll comment on a little bit what of David said. It's hallucinations, but the dangerous part is it's an almost believable lie. It's not an unbelievable lie. Like ChatGPT is not going to say that this forum is happening in Waterloo in Europe, right? It's going to say it's happening in Needles Hall. It's completely believable that this is happening somewhere on campus. It's still a lie, but it's very believable. And in code, it does the same thing, right? When it's trying to write code, it doesn't produce complete gibberish most of the time, but it's close enough, yet wrong, and very wrong, right? When you actually look at it, it's very wrong, but, and productivity gains are being reported by developers who have experience of going to a good program, experience of being a good developer for a long time. We don't yet know what actual quality of code produced or productivity gains from someone who's learning to do this by using ChatGPT. And we don't know that yet, right? Like, and initial studies suggest it's a bad idea, that there is no learning happening, right? They'll ask something, if it sounds believable, they accept it and move on, right? And you ask them again about the same thing a day later, they have no idea. Actually, there was a recent study which they did where people were given problems and asked not to use ChatGPT to solve the problem, a coding problem. And then 2 days later, they were asked about the coding problem, and they could clearly explain why they did what they did and whether it was right or wrong. And people who used ChatGPT, even though they had a higher likelihood of getting the correct answer, did not remember what they did later. So there's no learning in humans happening, and these are not ready for being done automatically. You need help. So I think as far as curriculum goes, tying back, we still need to teach the basics. We still need to teach, like what Gard was saying, like what the fundamentals are, like, and learn whether, and evaluate whether the students are learning those fundamentals, right? I don't think we were ever a university, or any top university claims that they are, their goal is to teach Python is never a goal as part of a computer science program, right? The goal was to learn how to problem solve. If you learn Python on the way, great. If you learn something else on the way, great. Boot camps are dead, right? If they said, I can teach you something in 4 weeks and that's all you need to get a job and survive and all of those kind of things are effectively, I think, gone. But fundamentals, I don't think that's going to change how you problem solve.
I prefer the word fiction to lie. ChatGPT is very good at creating plausible, clever fiction. You know, it could write a Hollywood script as well as, you know, Oliver Stone or what's his name, Richie. So, but you don't hire a fiction writer to do coding. And I absolutely agree. Why are we teaching coding? I mean, that's not a tangible outcome that I think is really important to develop our problem-solving skills. You know, if we need to build some artifact that does something, we should measure whether the artifact does what we want it to do. And, you know, as David is alluding, if it needs to be secure, we need to figure out how to measure whether it's secure or to prove, to try. And since I have the microphone, I just go back to Shai. I think we have to be very careful to try to blend theory and practice together. We don't want to have two different tribes, the theory tribe and the hacker tribe. You know, building stuff without theory is a mistake, and theory without practice is orphaned. We can tolerate a certain amount of it, probably more than we can tolerate hacking without theory. But for the most part, you know, the big breakthroughs in CS, you know, like, you know, to go back to the dawn of time when I was a student, you know, parsing, you know, you put the hackers and theorists together and then things get a whole lot better.
So I have a question for you folks. More and more of what you do and what your students do have profound social impacts. And I'm wondering where interdisciplinary studies and things like ethics fit into the curriculum moving forward. Are these necessary, appropriate, frivolous? What do you think?
So I have a very interesting story about ethics, and we have a wonderful course here in the David R. Cheriton Computer Science School called CS 492, and it is Social Implications of Computing. And originally, I had always thought of this course as this course that students tend to think is easy, everyone takes it, and you know, they get a good grade, and so everyone likes it. And that was always my impression of this course, until I was actually asked to teach this course. Almost maybe as the person who didn't put his hand down fast enough, but that's okay. I said, all right.
I thought you requested it for the record. Just for the record.
Voluntold is a very interesting way to say that. But anyways, okay, so I taught this course, and the more I've taught it, I've now taught it several times over the last couple of terms, probably more than I think any other faculty member here. And I've realized how important this course actually is. I had never thought about the impact of what I am doing on society as a computer scientist. And I can't speak highly enough of that process of thinking about what I'm doing and how it has a role was incredibly valuable. You know, I think students can take that course, and of course, you know, what a student gets out of this course is their own thing. But the concept of that course, and if you actually really take it seriously, I think you can learn a lot of very valuable lessons that are incredibly important. So if I were making a curricular change to CS, I would actually require some sort of ethics course, whether it be exactly CS 492 or something equivalent. I'm not as married to that concept, but I do believe that the act of getting students to think about, oh, how can algorithms be biased? What are my biases, and how am I injecting those into the software and the development that I'm doing? I think that's incredibly important now, more than ever. So yeah, if there was a change I was making, that would be maybe the one. Instead of having it as a side, I would have it as a main event in our curriculum.
Let me ask, go ahead, David.
Well, the problem I have with what I've seen in both ethics courses is I don't think they focus on the right element. Like, usually they get dragged off into, you know, is this fair to everybody, and are we putting people out of work and all that sort of thing. They miss the fact that the computer revolution has been one of the biggest wealth creations in the history of mankind. And, you know, I used to tell my students at Stanford, I'd bring in these articles from the Wall Street Journal where some report about, you know, computer system being used to calculate how to do landings with aircraft, which is reducing the fuel consumption by 10%, 20%, while all the people that are saving the environment are all flying off to Stockholm to have a big meeting to blow hot air at each other. And so I think there's an under-recognition of what computing is doing for the society, reducing pollution, improving efficiency, improving standard of living. And so I think there should be a portion, if we have an ethics course, it should celebrate computing and say, you're doing better for the planet than almost any other occupation. Now there's another piece, which is that I think if you're a civil engineer and you're building a bridge and somebody says, well, why don't we use these smaller bolts because they're cheaper? A civil engineer that's responsible would say, I'm not going to be part of this. Moreover, if you go ahead with this, I'm reporting this as, you know, malpractice. And I would think that if you're a doctor and you said you were involved in, somebody says, well, we're going to do an operation, we're just going to knock the patient completely out, even though it's not the appropriate thing to do, it's not right drug to use, you wouldn't want to be involved in this. Now, the example I used before here is if you're an engineer working on flight control software at Boeing and some MBA says you can only afford to have one angle of attack sensor on your aircraft, you should say, I'm quitting and I'm going to raise hell with the FAA, not that they got any brains, but I'm going to go straight to Washington and tell them you're going to kill hundreds of people with this. And it's that ethics of engineering, which I think we're really missing in computing. Because people will put in things like, if you're involved in a project and somebody says, oh, well, we need to be able to do this with management, let's just put in remote command execution. You should say, over my dead body, I'm leaving, I'm not part of this, and I'm going to raise hell about this, that this is an unsafe product, unless it's some stupid game. And even there, you might question because you have people, air traffic controllers, playing stupid games in the control towers. So I think I'd like to see that emphasis. We should have an ethics of being good engineers and not willing to be part of things that are just known to be bad.
Yeah, I think this culture of like move fast and break stuff is an unfortunate side effect of the abundance of computing. When I ran number crunching or when I did operating system research, they shut down the system at midnight and I had it till 4 a.m. And if it didn't come up, the payroll wouldn't run and the student records wouldn't run. And later on, my first co-op job was with the civil service, and if it didn't come up, the civil service payroll wouldn't run. And this imparts on you some sense of responsibility that I don't see in the general hacking population and even in people who are responsible for these big critical systems.
When people ask when we teach our first year courses how we emphasize testing right from the go, and the students hate it, but in my mind, I'm like, these are the people who are going to be writing software that one day will be keeping my I don't know, my heart valve alive or something like that, and it scares me. Go ahead.
So, on that line, another example is the car company that switched their modes from test mode to road mode. And it was an if condition. The management might have wanted to make that decision on let's make it more fuel efficient in the testing phase and less fuel efficient and more power hungry in the drive phase. But that if condition was made by a software developer who chose to write that if condition, even though it came up from, that's where they should say no, over my dead body, right? And it's a slippery slope that I think people start like break and move fast kind of thing. And now we've come to this in the AI world where there were demos of this product that automatically fixes bugs. I don't know if you've heard of Devin, that made up the demo, right? Like it's not even picked a right example to do the demo, which is bad enough or questionable enough. Their answer in the demo was wrong. It was just completely made up, and they had like music in the background and some deep voice just saying that this is the correct answer and everything, and everybody lapped it up. So I think that not only focus on fairness and everything, but also like what is the right thing to do and what should you do when you're asked to do the wrong thing?
So let me ask this one question. Let me steer it just one way. When I was preparing for this, I was just checking to see what different opinions out there were about the ChatGPT revolution. And one thing I struggle with as an instructor is the non-uniform nature of my students, kind of what Gord hinted at too. But we have the A+ students, we have the B students, we have the C students, we have the D- students. And when you're teaching a lecture, who do you target your lecture at? Do you go for those A+ students and make it a really rewarding experience for them, or do you sort of slow it down and teach to those C students? And what a lot of people say is where the ChatGPT revolution is going to have is more personalized educational experiences. So, an AI agent can have the time that we don't as instructors to sit with each individual student and figure out where their misconceptions are, and then help them reinforce and figure out where to focus on. And because we can sit down with each individual student and say, this is where your misconception is, and then help each individual student. We just don't have the capacity to do that. And this is where AI tools may come in. And this is probably, for me, the best case use I've heard of using some of these AI tools. I didn't know if any of you wanted to comment on that. Is it a fiction? Is it irresponsible? What if this AI tool helping the student hallucinates and teaches them the complete opposite of what I'm supposed to be teaching?
Sure, give students a problem that ChatGPT hasn't memorized the answer to, and if they think ChatGPT will help them, okay. I think, back to your question on curriculum, we have to structure our curriculum such that we pose problems and environments that aren't just rote regurgitation of all these facts. I think that maybe the curriculum is too narrow, though, I mean, we should look at other things that education offers, you know. The people you meet, both your peers and your mentors and the superstars that come through, these are an important part of your education. And it seems to me you're much less likely to run into these things in an online environment. You know, like I got to drive Paul Erdish to the airport, and I had beer with D.H. Lamer and John Selfridge, and none of those things would happen if I was just, you know, sitting in my mother's basement learning Python.
I just want to say, there's already examples of that. So Khan Academy does this for high school, like middle school and high school education, where they have a highly restrained version of GPT that is there to help their students, because they don't have the capacity to provide a human TA to tens of thousands of students taking their courses. So they do have a restricted version of GPT that is there to help students. So there is a production version of this already in place.
So I think there's sort of two types of people in the world. My theory here, there's the people that question everything. And so when they use ChatGPT, they don't understand something. They look at the response and they say, does that make sense to me? And did I really believe this? And, you know, test it out and so on. And the other type would say, oh, that's what it is. Why don't I just cut and paste that into whatever I'm doing and go on? And I think this is where you find that I think there's just a long history of tools that human beings develop, and the people that are good get made better by the tools. The people that are less good often cut their fingers off with it. And so I think that there's no one answer here. And in many ways, I think that if I can switch off onto Back in the Future of computer software education, that one of the things that has changed about the world, I don't know how much software actually existed in 1973 when I first came to Waterloo, but as I recall, I mean, the sizes of memories were so small that I can't imagine that anybody talked in terms of hundreds of thousands of lines of code. I think it was probably 10,000 or in the 10,000 sort of range. And now you have some individual applications that are 10 million lines long, and you have just a huge quantity of software out there. And so we're in the most bizarre situation you can imagine, where the world is running on software. Historically, our numbers, people argue there's something rather between 1 and 5 bugs per 1,000 lines of code, which means that, when you go in for heart surgery, don't worry, there's only 50,000 bugs in the software that's performing this operation. And how do we get out of this? Well, the Wall Street Journal characterized this as a multi-trillion-dollar problem of old software. And so you can imagine changing some of the education to say, well, how do we produce people that can survive in this software swamp, where you can't drain the swamp overnight. You don't want to sink under and disappear out of sight. Somehow you have to stay afloat and make some more solid ground. And I think this is one of the more challenging aspects of where we are. Reason I think we can't even conceive of the mess that we've created in some ways. I mean, it's a glorious mess, but it's a frightening one, because again, the numbers I've found on the web is the estimated cost between $100 and $200 per line of code to develop what we consider commercial quality software. So when you do the math and you say, well, if I have a 10 million line application, to rewrite this thing is just an absurd amount of money. Do the math. And of course, we know these rewrites are prone to failure too. So there's this incredible challenge in dealing with this swamp of software, figuring out how to refactor, how to identify problems in that. And you know, that I think is an interesting challenge for the future of computer education. If I can sneak in one more thing, that I was involved in a startup where we hired this guy who had a PhD in pure math, and he was great at this refactoring problem. And the curious thing about it is he'd never taken a computer science course, but he'd followed this path of, you know, I was good at math, so I went to grad school and I got a PhD in math, and I became a postdoc at Stanford in mathematics, and I realized that there was no career path in mathematics. And so what he did was he dived into GDB, which is many of you know GDB, a debugger that used with C and C++ and so on, and he started fixing bugs in this. Now, this is a whole different experience. I don't know, GDB must be, I'm not sure, several 100,000 lines of pretty frightening code. And you know, the ability to go in there and figure out how to fix anything without breaking something is a world-class skill. And so we got to know this guy because he was filing fixes to GDB that were causing us problems. So we asked him whether we could hire him as a consultant, and then it turns out he's looking for a job, so we hired him. It was one of the best hires we had. And so I don't know where that leads someplace other than, you know, that experience. He became an extremely valuable software engineer just by diving into a large piece of antique software that thousands, millions of people are using and actually surviving.
I think the takeaway there is that a math degree is always useful. All right, would you not? There we go. We had a question up there.
I think first, a small comment, if you weren't aware that the Boeing whistleblower did end up dead under mysterious circumstances, so over my dead body is literal in some cases. But kind of maybe pointing to the pressure. So you guys have brought up the different sort of pressure and requirements and expectations, and perhaps even how they have shifted in industry as a whole. So if you don't want to do something or you can't do something, they'll just find someone to eventually do it. And I personally feel that this puts a lot of pressure on CS education, where if we do want to focus on, you know, teaching people how to think, which is extremely important, that an employer wants is somebody who can write Python code, and they want a Python coder with a university degree. And there's an extreme pressure on students from, I don't know, it's expensive to exist. You know, people call it entitled, but like rent is a lot and living is a lot, and you want a job and you have certain expectations for your degree, and your employers have certain expectations. And if you're gonna spend all this money, like, damn it, I better get paid, you know? So that kind of goes against the ideas of it's important to learn, it's important to think, it's important to develop more holistically as a computer scientist, as a person, as part of your education. And so I'm wondering how you deal with that tension moving forward, where there's a ton of external pressure on students to do a very compartmentalized job, often at the behest of people that don't know anything about computer science, versus what we think is important, you know, for innovating, for moving the field forward, and for developing thoughtful computer scientists, which is really about problem solving and integration and all these, you know, fungible, you know, tasks that aren't easily expressed as, and this is how you write the Python code to do that.
Don't be shy.
I mean, my feeling is that we really do have to separate, you know, academic and vocational training. You know, if you want to become a concert musician, there's a certain thing you do. If you want to study music, it's helpful to play an instrument, but it's not necessarily the same thing. I'm not sure how to do that. Obviously, the bread and butter is the people who want jobs, you know. Would Waterloo be in a position to, you know, shrink our undergraduate intake from 1,200 to 200? I don't know. we have a little bit of an enrichment program that maybe attracts some of the more curious and less job-oriented people, but that's really just a little tiny piece of what we do. So the short answer is I don't know.
If I can chime in here, I think my sense is that there are some companies that realize that quick and dirty, there's some saying about quick and dirty that quick is long forgotten and dirty is remembered forever. And I think that I was involved in a company, Arista Networks, where part of the inspiration was some unknown company called Cisco had such terrible software engineering practices that we started a new company, and the software practice was much better, and the people that joined it were enthused about, and we wanted people who were enthused about much better software practice. So we started at a much lower feature level than Cisco was up here in terms of features, but our feature velocity was like this because we followed a good software discipline, whereas at some point, this quick and dirty gets you into this swamp behavior where every bug you fix creates another one. And so our feature velocity was like this, and I just knew because we established a stronger feature velocity, we'd eventually pass Cisco, and we did, and rest is history. But the other thing I've cited in previous symposium here, one of my favorite articles about software engineering by Nancy Leviton, and it's entitled The History of Steam Engines and Software Engineering. And with steam engines, the history of steam engines is pretty much the same as computer science, where Stephen Watt invents a steam engine, low pressure, not blowing anybody up. The MBAs get involved in, well, let's crank up the pressure, we can drive bigger things, we can do this, we can do that. At some point, steam engines were killing several thousand people a year in the United States. And as my understanding, it was one of the first times that the government imposed safety regulations on steam engines. And the result was it produced this flurry of research and investigation in how do you build boilers that don't blow up? What are the dynamics taking place within boilers? What are the stresses taking place on metals? And I've encountered so many frustrations where people don't want to build software right that I've retreated in the mode that at some point we'll have that moment. And you realize that Bill Gates is this evil genius, has managed to push end user license agreement on us, on the world, which means with software, there's no product liability. It's not our fault, and even if it is, you can't blame us for it. Is kind of the summary I use of that. At some point, I think that has to change. And when it changes, and we have this swamp of software, what is the background we want our students to have to do that? And so to me, it's a question, I think that has to happen at some point because we've got more and more evidence that we're about to destroy civilization with software. So the question is, when does that happen? And then what do we do at that point? And of course you have politicians are a bunch of idiots that think, well, we should have kind of a nerd Peace Corps that comes out and saves the world. Like, if the internet goes down, we'll have nerds leap into action and figure out what to do. Well, it could be years to figure out what to do. So, and with trillions of lines of software, if it's all so bad, how do we get out of this? And I think there's this challenge of figuring out how do you teach people something so they're prepared for that moment. I think it's a huge challenge.
So it's not, I think that there are computing jobs, there are software jobs where you don't need a computer science, you just need to know Python, right? And there are a lot of these things. But there are also products that are like planes and even computing devices. Macs and IBM ThinkPads and all of this, and all of these operating systems are not here if they were crashing every 5 minutes, right? We wouldn't use them as a software. So there are companies that want reliable software, that wants people to build software where they know what problem they're solving. And as a university, I think we should not worry about the first one, which is like how to hack together something and just learn Python. We shouldn't be in the business of teaching Python. We should be in the business of, not in the business actually, in the service of teaching how to learn computing. And there are job opportunities for that, as evidenced by generations of Waterloo engineers going out and working in great companies with a great job. I don't think it's a either or. You can be successful, you can have a strong career learning fundamentals and learning how to solve problems.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a talk I saw once where a CEO basically said, I need 95% doers and 5% thinkers in my company. And I think what we need to do is make sure our brand is that we're training the thinkers, because it's those 95% doers that will be replaced in the AI generation. And it's the thinkers that need those critical thinking skills, and that's what we're teaching our students. That needs to be part of our brand. And we need to even dissuade employers from saying, yeah, we're not training Python monkeys. We are training thinkers.
Maybe just to echo this, right? I don't think that we're geared to train people that are, prolific in different languages. I feel, the sentiment among students is that, we have a racket course, a Python course, a C++ course, a C course. And I think that's a little bit of a disservice to what a lot of these courses do, because a lot of them really do promote critical thinking skills. That first course when you get here, that CS 115 or 135 or 145, that really is a course about how to think about computational skills, how to problem solve, right? The fact that we use the language racket, I've been critical of this decision for many years. However, pedagogically speaking, I very much understand it. It's a nice language, it's not too difficult to learn, and it really allows instructors to focus on the problem solving. So I do think straight out the gate, that's really what we focus on. And I think it's that student sentiment that really propagates, and justly so.
But then 95% of the students get to second year, they start hacking in C++, they say, thank God I don't have to use anything I learned anymore. They have no idea what the running time of insertion into an array list is. They don't even have a clue. You don't need the source code. You don't even need the specification. The name should tell you that. But they're busy learning C++ minutia, which no human being could ever understand completely. This is one of these pieces of software that has become such a monster. We sort of learn to stay away from the dark alleys and sharp edges. But that's not really an education in my view.
I'll be sure to add insertion sort to my next exam course. Sorry.
I used to, in 241, when it was a 2A course, I used to tell people to read in 10,000 numbers, print them out, and then print them out again. And half the class had extreme difficulty doing that.
All right, we have time for one more question. Anyone? Go ahead.
Oh, we have, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know the microphone's up there. My bad, my bad.
Like 7 minutes. We have 3 people. Maybe we can keep.
Sure.
Yeah, I have a brief comment about this idea of responsibility. I would say there's been kind of a lot of focus on, what if our AI systems are too stupid and they're just memorizing things. And, first of all, they're not just memorizing things. It wouldn't be useful if they were. And for today, they're pretty stupid. But I think in terms of responsibility, it's maybe more important to think about, what if they're too smart soon.
So I just wanted to ask you about the evaluation that's currently happening at the university, because I feel that the generative AI systems have grown faster than there have been guardrails that have been developed around it. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts on how to evaluate students so that the evaluation procedure is fair and unbiased, so that you're not wasting the students' time as well as the instructor's time, where you make the TAs grade ChatGPT, for example?
Well, I try to evaluate with concrete, measurable outcomes that can't be generated by ChatGPT. So, I mean, I think it's crazy that we sometimes still have people scribble out code on a piece of paper that is marked by, marked by eye. This seems nuts to me. So we need automated as much as we can evaluation of whether this artifact meets the specification or not. And if it's not automatically evaluable, it has to at least be objectively evaluable. And as I've said, it should be something that at the moment ChatGPT can't do. I'm not sure I agree that it does more than creative fiction, but that's another discussion.
And any student who is going to use ChatGPT to generate an answer, they got the answer in 30 seconds. Before ChatGPT, they got the answer in about 3 minutes by doing a Google search, right? They're going to copy paste from some forum, some Stack Overflow thing. So if the assignment is just asking for something that you can find online or some of these tools can generate, you're going to have the students who cheat will cheat. And I don't think that that's any different. I think the assignment should be such that you're not finding this as a copy-pastable solution somewhere or a generatable solution somewhere.
Well, I use in-lab exams when they have no access to ChatGPT or any other resources other than what they're given.
So if I can suggest a slightly different approach, which is that instructors get to cheat now because lots of instructors are using ChatGPT to make up exams. And so if you say, well, okay, you guys are cheating that way, so you're saving yourself a whole bunch of time. So now you have to find questions that ChatGPT gets wrong. And so you focus on asking questions, asking people to write programs that they get wrong. And then if you get the answer back that's wrong, you know that they haven't managed to understand it. And somebody who can use ChatGPT, get an answer and realize what's wrong with it and fix it is a valuable person in the 21st century.
Final exam question. How many R's are in strawberry? All right, I think, we have one more? Go ahead. Yep.
So thank you guys for coming along. There is an article I read about worse is better, and worse is better is worse, and a series of arguments on how if you take the time to build something the right way, you might miss the wave where the poor solution has already gained so much adoption, and now people are working on trying to fix it. And we see that happen with a lot of the popular software we use, where it's just a prototype that's got some more code around it to make sure that it handles some of the error cases, but it was never really built principally for that particular use case. And as I was thinking about this problem, I came across some folks from Amazon who were facing the same issue with some of their core identity management code that handles a few million requests every second. And what they did was they tried to come out of this swamp, as David mentioned. And their approach was that they would build a specification in a language called Daphne, and they verified that this was exactly what they were trying to achieve, that it did what they expected to do for now. And the reason why that investment was so important was because then, if they wanted to write some optimizations, or if they wanted to follow through with ideas that they'd had for about a decade, if not 15 years, but they would dare not touch this code, because if something breaks, that's a $100 billion business that goes out the window. What do you think about this being some sort of future path forward, where we can build specifications around code with the knowledge that we have around verification of sequential programs, at the very least, and that could serve as a chart forward, or a path forward when it comes to draining the swamp, so to speak?
Well, I'm aware that Amazon is using some, I think something that Leslie Lamport originally developed of software for sort of formal specifications of software. And I think that it's interesting that, as you say, these people are operating at scale such that the damage that gets done if it screws up is big enough that they want to do things right. And I think that's where hopefully that sort of wisdom will filter down so that we have a better understanding of how to do this. We develop tools how to do this, and so that it reduces the cost of doing this and brings it down so it's more part of standard software practice. So, actually, there's a lot of software practice that's really developed by industry first. And I think we're in a wonderful world in which there's a lot of really clever people out in the software industry, and we're benefiting from the fact that a lot of the companies are fairly enlightened in allowing people to publish things. And so I think there's a lot to pay attention, a lot to learn there.
All right, just to wrap this up, as Dr. Cheriton pointed out, Bill Gates is a genius, so I want to say that this panel came with no warranty or guarantees on correctness of any kind. I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank our question askers as well. Thank you very much, everyone.